the Ministry of Health or Health New Zealand needs a cybersecurity team that is focused on auditing all of the core systems that hold health data, including the private sector. So one of the important things about that is you need to hire the right type of staff for the team. You don't want a pack of policy advisors. They do great work, but they're the wrong type of person to be running this sort of system.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and great to have Callum McManaman from Open Access joining me on the show today. How are you, Callum?
Kia ora, Paul. Thanks for inviting me onto the podcast. Doing great, thanks.
Yeah, great to have you here. Maybe a quick intro for those who haven't come across you before, although you have been a fair bit in the media over the past couple of weeks with things to do with ManageMyHealth. Yeah, tell us a little bit about what you do with Open Access.
Yeah, so Open Access is a consultancy that I run, and I help organizations to make their digital platforms like websites and apps more accessible for disabled people. So just making sure that if someone is blind, for instance, they can fully utilize every feature of an app and a website. It's something that's pretty important for many services, especially government services. So I've been consulting now for like the last year, mainly working with NGOs and charities and providing a bit of training as well. And then before that, I helped to write the latest version of accessibility standards for New Zealand government, and I developed the monitoring system for that as well. So that's just a bit of background into what I've been up to over the past few years.
Fantastic. Well, really keen to delve into ManageMyHealth situation, and look, I come at this from sort of a number of perspectives, and I think that there's a degree in which it's important for us to step back. At this point in time, obviously there's still information and reporting and gaps to fill in on exactly what did happen. I'm particularly interested in how, as a country, we do better from a cybersecurity and a data privacy perspective, and I'm really interested in us, chatting around some potential approaches that could help with that. And when we were talking, prior to the show, I think we've maybe got some interesting approaches that might not have necessarily been, well, certainly aren't in place today, put it that way. That might be able to help. But tell us how ManageMyHealth got onto your radar, because you preempted this, maybe sort of 6 months ago that there was a concern around a lack of multi-factor authentication, being required to access the ManageMyHealth system, which, I think we know is very much at odds with, with current standards for logging into things, whether it's, placing an order for some Kentucky Fried Chicken or, whatever else it is, right? Like there was an issue and you raised it.
Yeah, so it was about 6 months ago. I looked into a crystal ball and I saw all of this happening. But no, in reality, 6 months ago, I basically did an audit of all of my digital accounts. And I just wanted to list what form of authentication security I had on every single account. Completely normal thing to do. And basically, I went through and made sure that every account that I used had at least multi-factor authentication, or even more secure, I use a YubiKey, so hardware-based authentication on those services. And pretty much every single thing that I used supported multi-factor authentication except ManageMyHealth. And a point I've been making in the media is even KFC has mandatory MFA, multi-factor authentication. So it's rather unusual that we can order chicken so securely, but our health portals still don't have MFA. Recently, ManageMyHealth has added a multi-factor authentication feature. So you can use, I believe, or maybe email-based 6-digit codes.
Yes.
But it's not mandatory, and it's, users have to go and enable it manually. So I would say that the percentage of people that have that enabled will be pretty low.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I found myself on the ManageMyHealth platform because my GP used it, and I was not aware of there being any MFA capability when I used it during COVID. the GP stopped using it maybe a couple of years ago. This was one of the other things that shocked me, was that after the GP stopped using it, we all know that old data should be removed, and you don't just sort of leave this stuff kicking around, and that was not done. Now, I think this comes into, I guess, looking at a range of lessons that we can all take away and encourage some better behaviour going forwards.
Yeah, I read into those reports where practices had moved between patient portals. They might have moved from ManageMyHealth to MyIndice, and all that data was just kept inside ManageMyHealth. So then you've got everyone's patient data spread across two systems, which doubles the attack surface, right? So the places where hackers can get in are just doubled, because there's two systems you can attack now instead of one. So there's some pretty obvious information security risks when data is treated that way. It'd be so much better if there was a way to ensure that health data only existed in one place at a time. It would probably make it far less likely to encounter these kinds of breaches.
Yeah, there's probably some pros and cons of sort of approaches of how you link everything together if it's in one place, but then you can access it from a portal that goes back, and the portal doesn't have MFA on it. Then you could be opening up to a lot more data if all your data was there. In my case, because it was the health files that were compromised, I had a look and recognised I didn't actually have any health files in there, and so if I look at where I see some disappointment from my perspective, it's not just ManageMyHealth. It's the GP that selected a piece of software to store health data that would be available publicly, and we all know that a reasonably significant percentage of the population do not have unique passwords for different sites that they access.
Yeah.
So when you're going through a software selection process, and this is something my firm's involved in on a very, very regular basis, from two perspectives. One, from helping organisations to select software that is going to be a fit for purpose, as well as being appropriate from a risk perspective, data privacy and cybersecurity. So we do that on the involved in the selection side. The other area we come in is to try and fix up when an organisation has selected some software and maybe they've started realising that they didn't get it right and that there are some issues. So we kind of come at that from two perspectives. But we've certainly come across this in another area where data privacy was very important and some software was selected, and the provider involved who selected the software had done what they considered appropriate due diligence, but it didn't even include the basics of checking things like is there multi-factor authentication. So that I would say there's numerous people who are probably culpable there, not just ManageMyHealth. It's your GP and whatever technologists were signing off and saying, yeah, let's go with this platform, without going back to ManageMyHealth and saying, hey, we'll sign off on your platform once you've ticked these boxes and address these risks and given us clarity that we're making an appropriate move.
Yeah, well, the government's security framework for health, the Health Information Security Framework, basically does that. It delegates responsibility down to the lowest levels of the system. So, for instance, Health New Zealand or the Ministry of Health, they claim to not be responsible for the security of these systems. They also claim to not be responsible for monitoring the implementation of health information security frameworks. So all of the responsibilities delegated down to the GP. I question whether it really is the most sensible model to make our 1,000 GP practices individually responsible for upholding data security requirements. I'm sort of more of the opinion that the government should have had a more centralized approach to its assurance of data security for health information. Basically, if you're going to privatize digital health systems, we at least need to make sure that information isn't going to be public as a basic requirement, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we've had private healthcare, general practitioners, for a very, very long time. In my case, my general practitioner is part of a much bigger group, the doctors, and so to me they're of the scale you would expect them to be able to make a professional decision and select software accordingly and hold their software vendor to account, but they didn't. But I see the wisdom in having appropriate mechanisms when it's things like health data, financial data, and so on, that we have the right structures in place. And when we look at, say, the world of banking, our banks are held to account in varying areas, financially. Otherwise, the regulator comes in with an iron fist, right? And people potentially end up in jail and the like when it comes to financial things. When it comes to privacy, this is probably something I've been going on about for a reasonable period of time, is we haven't had legislation that really has teeth. So in a situation where there is, say, negligence in how data has been looked after and it leads to some sort of a breach, then what we've seen in Australia, for instance, is fines, millions of dollars. We've seen people in New Zealand, like a former prime minister, as a director, get held to account on financial matters, but when it comes to these privacy matters, as a director, it seems to be a sort of a wet bus ticket. So I think there's an element here where, as a country, we can step that up, right? But now, delving into the work that you've done from an accessibility perspective with government entities, you were telling me around the auditing mechanisms that you're involved in setting up. So automated auditing of government websites from an accessibility perspective. And I'm really interested to see, could there be a parallel in terms of what goes on there with how we should be looking after, government and government data, individuals sort of, key data like health data. And is there a parallel? Is there a better way? And of course, other countries around the world, do a lot more than New Zealand. We do have to consider this in the context of, let's say we were comparing, and earlier we were chatting around a friend of mine who built a website for Royal Mail in the UK. Now that's a government entity, equivalent, I guess, of New Zealand Post here, and they were held to a very high standard when it came to accessibility in the UK. But of course, you've got something like 10 times the population of New Zealand. So in terms of funding that sort of thing, more money available. And then we had some interactions on a project that he was involved in here in New Zealand for the Blind Foundation. And so you've got these realities that we have to recognise with New Zealand. We don't necessarily have as deep pockets as some other countries, but we also need to still get things right when it comes to data privacy and cybersecurity. And so we have to find a way to move forward. That means we don't get continuous repeats.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So what I've noticed in this situation is the way the government handles accessibility and all the history there seems to be basically identical to the way that information security is being handled. So for accessibility in New Zealand government, we have a standard called the Web Accessibility Standard, and that's been mandated by Cabinet for over 20 years, I believe. So pretty much all government agencies have to meet this standard. But what happens if an agency chooses to ignore the standard? Well, basically nothing. The system doesn't have any kind of enforcement mechanism. So when I joined my last role in New Zealand government at Internal Affairs, they were responsible for the accessibility standard. So I sort of took that job with the condition that I'd get to build an automated system to centrally monitor how well every agency is meeting the accessibility standard. So I used open source software, Xcore, and I built a web crawler using Python. And this Python script would basically crawl every single public facing government website, and it would automatically test it against the accessibility standards. Automated testing only picks up about 20% of issues, so it's not full coverage. But my argument is always 20% coverage across the entire system every 3 months is a lot better than zero coverage at all.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant initiative, and yeah, making that sort of part of taking on the role, absolutely
Yeah,
perfect, right? What a good way to do it.
yeah. Well, I started developing the code before I got the job in my spare time, and it was sort of like, it was a bit of a janky Python script at the time, and I was thinking, man, this really needs to be part of the public service. So yeah, they ended up adopting it, and I sort of donated it to the government. So it's under their control now. However, it's open source under a GPL v3 license, so you can take the code, you can run it on your own computer, and other governments even could use the system if they wanted to. And the data that comes out of the system is published publicly on data.govt.nz. So this government performance data across all agencies, which frankly airs all of their dirty laundry about accessibility, because
Yes.
most of them are failing horrifically, that's all public. And Internal Affairs has released a leaderboard of agencies, and simultaneously I released a loser board, which ranks the agencies and the websites based on how badly they fail.
Did that help?
It's had a response,
Yeah.
I would say. Some people love it, some people hate it. I've been looking at the data, because data's been released now for about 9 months. So there's been 3 releases of quarterly data, and the average number of accessibility issues per page is slightly declining. I haven't yet done any proper statistical analysis on it to determine if that's like a significant amount of decline or whether it's just noise, but that's something that I'll be doing once we've got a few more data points.
Yeah, so that concept of regularly auditing and seeing how compliant those government entities are when it comes to accessibility, I imagine you could mirror some of that from a cybersecurity and data privacy perspective, especially if you were to go a little bit further and to take what you can get automatically and put a requirement on those entities to also whether it's run some additional auditing in-house or to answer a series of questions on a regular basis. There would be a mechanism that would give us certainly much more clarity around some of these sorts of issues. And then I guess it's deciding, well, who does it cover? Is it just the government entities? Or, in this case, we're looking at really important data, health data. I think financial data probably sits in a similar sort of category. Maybe those that are regulated in some ways or hold personally identifiable information like, scans of people's, driver's licenses and passports, which we've seen breached, in this country, in the past by the likes of, KiwiSaver provider and so on. So yeah, I wonder whether that is something that would make sense to actually fire up on a similar basis.
Absolutely, that is exactly my thought. So the thing that I'm advocating for is that the Ministry of Health or Health New Zealand needs a cybersecurity team that is focused on auditing all of the core systems that hold health data, including the private sector. So one of the important things about that is you need to hire the right type of staff for the team. You don't want a pack of policy advisors, basically. No shade on policy advisors. They do great work, but they're the wrong type of person to be running this sort of system. We need software developers. So with the right kind of software, either developed in-house or using off-the-shelf software and integrating it together, you could probably develop a very, very good monitoring system for security that will be able to cover hundreds, if not thousands, of systems. So that's what we did for accessibility. I was a single software developer by myself, and I generated a system that had oversight over the entire government's set of websites. So you don't need a huge amount of investment to run this kind of system. You just can't you can't hire the types of staff who do everything via an Excel spreadsheet. You need someone who understands how to program systems, who can leverage AI as much as they can. And that's one of the biggest benefits with these automated compliance monitoring systems is with current algorithms, you might get 20% of coverage of issues. But obviously, AI is getting smarter and smarter. And as it gets more intelligent and reliable, you'll be able to start integrating it slowly, more and more, into that monitoring system. And you've already got all the bedrock laid for that monitoring framework to be running. So I just see it as a strategy that is only going to get more and more effective as time goes on without needing, 500 staff to be constantly manually auditing systems.
Mm. Now, something I do want to comment on in terms of ManageMyHealth, and this came out quite late in the piece, is my understanding is that they've got ISO 27001 certification from a cybersecurity perspective. This to me is, it's usually a positive sign when organizations, commit to this type of compliance, but it's not the be all and end all. So, I think credit where credit's due, that they've obviously have made, they've made that investment, and that would be, a part of software selection process is looking at whether an organization's got these things in play. But it's a reminder to us that having a checklist is not the entire process to solving these sorts of problems. And you've got to have people that are aware and familiar with the sorts of challenges and risks that exist, and you've got to keep changing what you measure and look at. And a compliance mechanism that's weeks, months, or years old, the longer that time span is, the more things it's going to miss, because the cybersecurity landscape will continue to change. There'll be new threats, new approaches. That said, I agree with you around your earlier comments around multi-factor authentication. I mean, this is kind of basic sort of table stakes for any system that holds any important data. There's I'm sure a few things in this world where multi-factor authentication might not be make that much difference in the scheme of it, but that's becoming a smaller and smaller percentage of systems. And with this type of data, I don't think there's probably any excuse.
Yeah, and you're right about ISO 27001, where it's great that they claim to meet that standard, but that's a standard that also doesn't mandate multi-factor authentication, as far as I'm aware. It's very people-based, very process-based. Do you have an incident management plan? That kind of framework. So it doesn't go down to the level of fine-grained application security controls. That's where I think there's room for an additional standard to be mandated and monitored by the government, where they just pick a minimum set of technical controls that must be present in all applications that hold health data. And that could include requirements like multi-factor authentication, rate limiting of login attempts, which from the public information sounds like was also an issue with ManageMyHealth. You could make thousands of API requests trying to log in and it wouldn't get blocked. Other technical security controls might be appropriate use of capture technologies to prevent bots from trying to hack systems automatically. All of those sorts of things could probably be added as an additional standard, which currently is absent. The Health Information Security Framework is much like ISO 27001, where it's very high level. The Health Information Security Framework does not mandate multi-factor authentication either. Yeah. It mentions it as a great technology, but it doesn't mandate it. Yeah. And I just think in 2026, relying on password authentication is just not acceptable, because passwords are so easy to breach with credential stuffing and all those sorts of things.
Yep. No, I think we're probably all on the same page on that. Yeah, I guess, It's interesting. My firm's involved in cybersecurity auditing, and part of what we do is, for say technical teams, we'll help them out. So they're able to get things addressed without having to wait for the scary thing of the board saying, hey, we want to get an audit. Actually, sometimes that's much better to come from a technical team, to get someone that will come alongside you, look out for issues and then work with you to solve them, and then you can report back up to the board. But we also do it the other way around as well. And look, the reality is, any sort of audit or security framework is not going to catch every single thing. So, there's an ongoing active action required. All right, well, keeping moving, lots more we can sort of delve into on that one, but I think we'll leave it there for today. We did get news through from Facilities Group, Canopy Healthcare, around a security breach there, July 2025, impacting patient records and some confidential data, impacting potentially similar sort of number, 127,000 patients potentially impacted there. And it's kind of only just now that we've learnt about that one. I think we'll leave that one there as well, rather than delving in. But certainly some other lessons. The other thing from a New Zealand perspective in the news, company SCX.AI out of Australia, partnering with New Zealand entity Korero.ai on building an in-country, here in New Zealand, Aotearoa, sovereign AI platform being called Project Korero. And the idea is that this would be deployed on local New Zealand infrastructure, be very much focused on New Zealand, support for te reo, and drawing on the work that SCX have already done. And, with governance being able to be, very much local, and with the goal of a rollout in 2026. What do you think about this idea of sort of sovereign AI? It's been, bandied around, a few people suggesting, hey, government needs to do this. We need to have something that's local. We don't have to rely on the rest of the world. Are you keen?
Yeah, very keen. I think it's incredibly risky to completely rely upon foreign companies for our access to artificial intelligence and for computation, because intelligence and computation is going to become increasingly important as time goes on. One of the things that I'm very interested in is in the US, the data centers running AI are not very environmentally friendly. They create a lot of pollution through the way their electricity is generated, and the way that they cool the chips as well wastes a lot of drinkable water. So in New Zealand, I think we've got some massive advantages around that, where, for instance, we could, instead of making aluminium with the Manapuri hydro station, aluminium's pretty old and boring, why don't we invest that electricity in huge amounts of computation? And then we could have some of the greenest computation and intelligence in the world, because it's all just hydropowered. So I think New Zealand has some opportunities to become a leader in that sense. And I think there's already data center companies taking advantage of our hydropower for that exact purpose.
Yeah, look, I'm really curious how this might play out. The local entity, has only just been launched. Just looking at a little bit of the information that's online on LinkedIn. So, I think this is something that's very new, one person sort of associated with it. I think if this can be done and can be financed and can be sort of solid and stable, could be really exciting. But I think we're right at the beginning, in terms of the realities from what I'm seeing publicly. But happy to hear from them and delve into this a little bit more to understand how it could play out. But some important points there that you raise, Callum. So thanks for that. Now, just quickly wanted to. There's been things floating through the media around CES, what used to be Consumer Electronics Show. happens early January every year. What caught my interest and attention this year was the worst of show stuff. I haven't noticed those things sort of maybe hitting the news as much in the past, but we saw a whole bunch of kind of humanoid robots and these things kind of falling over and being clumsy. There's LG's robot to help around the house, and it's got its articulated arms and its hands and I think the sorts of things they were highlighting is its ability to load or unload your dishwasher, folding laundry, serving food and controlling smart appliances. Now this is still at sort of a concept stage rather than a commercial product, but I think you were curious whether we need a robot that might take a very, very long time to do something that as a human you could get done lickety split.
Yeah. I saw one of the videos of this robot probably powered by 500,000 NVIDIA GPUs consuming 10 gigawatts of electricity, and it was just sitting there struggling to fold a tea towel. I found that moment to be quite fascinating. But we've got to start somewhere, and I'm sure everyone's seen there's been massive progress in our ability to control robotics. I imagine the computation involved in folding a tea towel is probably immense. It seems simple to us because we've had millions of years of evolution programming our brain and our sensory organs, but to develop human-made systems that can replicate that behavior is pretty incredible. So it should have amazing impacts even for disabled people as well, for instance. So some disabled people rely upon carers in order to help them with daily tasks. If we can get humanoid robots that we don't have to pay them as much, they're available 24/7, deal with any kind of privacy invasions, hopefully it could be an incredible future for many people.
Yeah. Now, other things that were kind of coming up in their kind of, I guess, fails or worst in show. Samsung got a call out for their bespoke AI family hub refrigerator, which you're supposed to be able to talk to it and it keeps a watch on what's in the fridge and what you might have available at a given time and so on. I guess issues there when the technology doesn't work perfectly, which we're all used to with AI and voice assistants, don't always hear what you say and get that stuff right, and maybe just don't really add that much value. And these are really, really expensive gadgets to have in your home. And the nature of them is that the software only ends up getting updated for a few years, and then you've got this really fancy gadget that really you probably should unplug for the safety of your home network at some point. Even if you like the features to start with, they soon get out of date.
Yeah, there is a direction of product design that does really frustrate me. Just the unnecessary integration of internet capabilities and screens on fridges. Just it's completely pointless as far as I'm aware. I think good product design for boring gadgets like a fridge is just make a good fridge, that keeps your food cold, that lasts a long time. I think that's all we really need from our fridges. And unnecessary internet integrations, it creates massive risks. So just recently, Logitech had issues with their peripherals, their mice across the entire world, where if you were using macOS and Logitech peripherals, Logitech's Options Plus software, which provides the drivers for those peripherals, just completely stopped working. And it's because Logitech forgot to renew a certificate for their code signing. It expired, and when that date was reached, macOS refused to launch the software, and that also impacted its auto updater. So they couldn't even patch the software once this issue occurred because the auto updater could not execute.
That was quite a debacle, and it's a reminder that we can end up with this disconnect between, technical and technology teams and leadership in a business where there's no understanding of what goes on. There would have been people within the organization that, knew this is something that should be monitored and should be dealt with on a regular basis. Who knows whether those people were still there or what the issue was, but these are things that shouldn't be left to chance. And it's kind of got echoes of privacy and other sort of technical problems that we've been talking about, where you get that disconnect between those that maybe know what the right approach is to run technology systems well, and those who are maybe in charge of an organisation, and you get some breakages and disconnect, and then things start falling over. The Ring doorbells, which is now owned by Amazon, they also won I don't know if win is the right term for being featured as a worst in show for privacy. And they said it was because they were doubling down on privacy invasion and supporting the misconception that more surveillance always makes us safer. And comment from Cindy Cohn, Executive Director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, who I think are involved in the judging the worst in show. And apparently there's this new feature which Ring have rolled out is an AI unusual event alert that's supposed to detect unexpected people or happenings, such as, in quotes, a pack of coyotes arriving at your door. So I find this one quite fascinating because some years ago I was supposed to do an interview with the founder of Ring doorbells at CES, but there were some privacy headlines at the time, some issues of some missteps from Ring. And so I don't think Jamie, the CEO and founder, even turned up at CES. Certainly my interview with him got kicked to the curb. And I was quite interested in chatting with him because it's quite an interesting story how he's built the $1 billion business and sold it to Amazon and got rejected on the Shark Tank program. No one wanted to invest with him. But anyway, it was kind of interesting that here they are back at CES and they're really being challenged from a privacy perspective. I will say I use the Ring doorbells and some of their technology and I like it, generally speaking. But also when I look back over the years, you kind of think around, well, would my life have been better or worse without some of these technologies? And I do think we have to start doing that with some of the technology we use, is evaluating how important really is it to our lives, and do we necessarily need everything that software and technology can deliver? Because sometimes as we've seen with the ManageMyHealth portal, the results are probably in the light of day, not in the right direction.
Yeah, and I also wonder, lots of people start frothing as soon as they hear the word cloud, and everything gets pushed into the cloud, and cloud just means someone else's computer. And I just wonder whether we could get more product design heading in the direction of systems being sort of more self-contained, doing more computation on the device, more storage of information on the device, so it's held within the local vicinity rather than sent to a central cloud location. So that's sort of what went wrong with Logitech. Too much of the functionality of their peripherals relies on systems that are outside of the mouse, that are outside of the keyboard. So it's a design philosophy that could help improve privacy if more is done locally.
Yep, no, it's a good point. Now on to other things at CES. Lego have come out and unveiled their smart brick at CES. What stood out to me is that this is just a normal size brick from Lego. It might be a reasonably expensive brick. I think they're 60 or 70 US dollars roughly for one of them. 70 US dollars. They'll usually come as part of other kits. Look, to me, I think things like, or a brand like Lego bringing in a component that maybe stirs some curiosity in a reasonably sort of easy to get your head around way is not a bad idea. But I don't know, you might not agree. What do you think, Callum?
I can see good things and bad things in it. So, good things is they're innovating, they're trying new stuff. It seems pretty interesting. The demo seemed somewhat interesting with, little flashing lights and sounds coming out of it. But on the other hand, it is slightly sad that very analog entertainment for kids, right, and adults, assembling Lego bricks is getting digitized increasingly. That sort of does make me a little bit sad. But I do remember back when I was a kid, there was that what was it called? Lego Mindstorms. There was like
Yes.
this whole Lego system where there was a little sort of microcontroller thing that you could program and stuff like that. So, they've delved into technology in the past, and it was pretty awesome. So, I don't know. Good on them.
Yep, we'll see how it plays out. Other news. Boston Dynamics announcing their production-ready version of their Atlas robot. So, yeah, and just always fun to watch the Boston Dynamics videos and see their robots doing all sorts of things, and their first deployments working with Hyundai. And putting them into commercial settings where they can operate. So it is an interesting sort of time ahead as we start to see these humanoid robots go into things like factories and scenarios where in the past you would have a single use robot with a specific role, and now as we move into a world with humanoid robots where a robot can be used for a much broader range of tasks potentially. But as you highlighted with the folding the laundry type of example, some of these use cases are yet to really be fully proven out. Other announcements: Intel have their Core Ultra Series 3 chips, and they're very much, I guess, hoping this is going to be part of their comeback. Intel really been struggling, versus the ARM chips and AMD as well, really massively impacting their market share and their share price and so on. And the other one that stood out is NVIDIA unveiling self-driving car technology. Now, their tech has been part of many systems, whether it's what Tesla have been doing and most others in the autonomous car world have used a reasonable amount of their technology. What they're launching is an open source reasoning AI platform specifically for autonomous driving. So yeah, it's going to be fascinating to sort of see, is that going to catch up very quickly to the other technologies out there? Are we going to, see those that have, maybe got their investments in the likes of Tesla and hoping that's going to make them a lot of money? Are we going to see, these companies that have been really invested in this area find out, actually, look, the technology's all been made open source, and you just need to throw money at NVIDIA and away you go. It's not about actually developing the technology yourself.
Yeah, with self-driving technology as well, I just think for disabled people particularly, that's going to be so incredible. So, for instance, I can't drive a car, so I unfortunately have to rely upon New Zealand's investments in public transport, which are practically invisible. So, if there were self-driving cars available where I could just press a button and a robot just drives me wherever I want to go, that would be life-changing. And I'm very frustrated that in New Zealand, we're obviously lagging behind and getting these robot taxis driving around and stuff. I just wish we could get that here as soon as possible.
Yeah, a little bit more of a wait ahead. Now, the last thing I'll add in as well. Now, this was not from CES, although a lot of this tech on site at CES. End of last year, I talked about trying out the new remarkable devices, which is sort of e-paper note-taking tablets. So, yeah, really, interesting to see that technology continue to evolve, and now coming through with a colour screen. So the one I've spent the most time with was the Remarkable Paper Pro Move. Quite enjoying that, but it did give me a bit of an initial view on the idea of e-ink and the new devices offering colour. So when the Kindle Coloursoft, that it got a bit delayed getting to me, but arrived sort of around Christmas, I probably had a not so positive sort of feeling around the idea of colour and e-ink devices. But as I've used these devices a little bit more, both the Kindle Coloursoft and also the Remarkable, which also competes with Kindle's. They don't have an exact equivalent of that particular one, but they do compete in that space of a paper replacement for note taking that's digital with e-ink. Yeah, I guess over my experience, I've probably decided that I actually do quite like adding in the colour into e-ink. There are just some scenarios where it really helps, but that does have to be balanced out with the reality, and I guess Kindle have put it there in the name with Kindle Coloursoft, is it's not the bright sort of vibrant colour that you can see with ink on paper, or the brightness that you'll see of colours from an LED. Just even using the Kindle and seeing all your book covers in colour sort of feels nice. There is, things like if you're looking at illustrations that are colour and so on, that it's definitely a nicer experience. And yeah, certain text that might be highlighted or what have you, sometimes that works well. Not in every case though. So for instance, if you've got, say some text that's been highlighted in red, what I found was that red text next to black text, the red text kind of just looks grey. So it's like, that's a little bit disappointing. But I think my pick is that in the same way our computer monitors moved from being monochrome back in my younger years to colour, this is probably the direction that much of this will move, and the price differential between a typical e-ink device and a colour e-ink device will mostly evaporate over time. But the other thing I saw sort of delving into this is there is a massive whole market of products that most of us have never heard of in terms of these note-taking e-ink devices, whole range of brands that aren't available necessarily broadly in major retailers and so on, and then more obscure ones that you can find on the vendor website or through AliExpress. I saw someone was really excited around a little one that they just attach to the back of their phone, and they read ebooks off it, and you can buy this little thing for something like 70 New Zealand dollars, and it's got a 4.3 inch screen or something. So there's a really great variety of these products. But yep, I think for me the colour is a win. Whether it's worth actually paying for it, that's going to be I guess down to the individual purchaser. But yeah, my pick is in the future that will just become the norm. The Kindle Coloursoft thing starts about $449 in New Zealand, so it's not a low cost purchase. And these devices don't last forever. That's been my experience as well. Kindles do tend to die after a few years for whatever reason. Not always, but I'd say my failure rate on Kindles is reasonably high, and I hear a lot of other people who find after a few years their Kindle just dies, for some unexplained reason. And the Kindle Scribe, which is their note-taking one that I got maybe 4 or 5 years ago, yeah, that's stopped working correctly now. So there we go.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool technology that we are now seeing colour and e-ink. It's long been just a very grayscale technology. So yeah, super happy to see that.
Yeah. Now, before we finished up, it'd be good if there's anything else that you want to, add in around, the work that you're doing at Open Access, or, where people should look if they're wanting to find out, a bit more about your work.
Yeah, so I've got a website. It's openaccess.nz. And yeah, we're just working. We generally provide audits of digital systems where you get like a very cool looking report on things to improve to make digital technology more accessible, more inclusive, and easier to use for everyone. So yeah, that's basically what I'm up to. And yeah, I've got a little blog there as well where I write some rants down occasionally.
Yeah, fantastic. And what would you say if you had to give one piece of advice to listeners, who are wondering, well, where should we start? What's the most basic thing that we should be doing? Maybe on the level of an equivalent for multi-factor authentication in the accessibility world. What's the basic starting thing that everyone putting a website online should aim to do?
Yeah, so I think one of the main things I would potentially look at is to just zoom in on your website. So on Windows, just hit Control plus a bunch of times. On Mac, hit Command plus a bunch of times, and just zoom into the web page. And does anything break? Is everything still usable, or does it just completely fall to pieces? Because that's quite common on web pages. So being able to zoom in on a web page is really important for people that have vision impairment. So that's just a very simple test that you can do, and something to fix if a developer notices that it breaks.
Excellent. Good tip. Thank you, Callum. Now, lastly, we've been running a little survey in the background. Anyone that hasn't completed the survey, still encourage you to jump online, nztechpodcast.com/survey, and fill that in. But as part of the period that we have been running it, we've been doing some giveaways as well. So we have 2 winners who will be alerted via email. We've got Stuart McIntyre, so thank you, Stuart, for entering. You've got your 1NZ Warriors jersey, Logitech keys to go, and Logitech Casa pop-up desk. And our other winner is Lillian Kwan, I think it is, who's run a Motorola Edge 60 Fusion and a Logitech Casa pop-up. Thanks, everyone, for that. Really appreciate the feedback, and we'll be delving into that a little bit more in terms of what we can take away from everyone's survey results. But as I say, if you still want to share your thoughts, would love to hear from you with your feedback on the New Zealand Tech Podcast. That's us for this episode. Of course, a big thank you to our incredible show partners, to 1NZ, 2 Degrees, Spark, Gorilla Technology, and Workday. I really appreciate them keeping us on air, the incredible work that they do to support the tech and innovation ecosystems here in New Zealand as well. Of course, if you've been watching the video, then follow us on your favourite audio podcast platform. And likewise, if you've been listening to the audio, you can follow us on your favourite video platform. We do usually stream through my profile on LinkedIn, Paul Spain. You can also find the video through on YouTube, X, and Facebook, I think. So, thank you very much, Callum, for joining us on the show, and thanks everyone for listening in.
Thanks.
Cheers.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.